Welcome back everyone. Today I have a fun project. We're going to be making a holster bag. And this is a super slim bag. It's a nice one to put under a jacket that you can fit a lot of items in. This project is a great project for all sewing levels. You're going to be learning a lot of new tricks and tips that you can utilize in future sewing projects. So if you're new to the channel, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you're going to want to grab 1.5 yards for your main fabric, and I recommend grabbing a canvas, denim, or twill, something that's a little bit heavier weight. I'm going to be using a heavier weight twill and an upholstery fabric. But keep in mind, you don't want all your fabrics to be very heavy weight, because when it gets to sewing, it's going to get really bulky. We'll get more into that later on. For your secondary fabric, you're going to want to grab 1 yard of something that's a padded fabric or a vinyl. And this is totally optional. You can actually use the same fabric you're using for your main fabric. You'll need 1/4 yard of lining, and this is only if you're using heavier weight fabrics. You'll need 1 lighter weight fabric for the inside of a pocket, but you need a very little amount. And again, this is also optional. If you're using a lighter weight fabric, you can totally use that fabric for this lining. You'll need 1 9 to 12 inch zipper. You don't want to go lower than 9 inches, and anything above 9 inches will work perfect because we're going to be snipping the ends. So I actually recommend going above 9 inches. You'll need 1 yard of 1.5 inch or 1 inch webbing, and this is going to go along with your buckle and your buckle slider. So whatever size webbing you're using, you're going to want to match that with your 1 buckle and your 1 slider. So just to recap that really quick, you'll need 2 yards of webbing, 1 buckle, and 1 strap slider. You'll need 1 1.5 inch D-ring and 1 2-inch O-ring. Again, for the D-ring, you're going to want to match that to the size webbing you're using. But for the O-ring, you want that to be 2 inches in diameter. You'll need 10 inches of a 1/2 inch width elastic, and this is also optional if you decide to add the loops in the bag. You'll need 10 inches of Velcro, and this can totally be up to you on the size you choose. You can go from 1 inch up to 4 inch because we're actually going to be using a wider with Velcro and trimming it to the bag end. But if you can't find a color in that wide width, you can totally use smaller sizes and add it on as strip. You'll need 2 snap button closures, and you can use magnetic or regular. I'm going to be using magnetic. I like the way they work and they're easy to install, but it's totally up to you. And lastly, you're going to need your pattern. This pattern is available at Properfit clothing. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is print it out, tape it together, and you're ready to go. And after you print it out, the easiest thing to do is cut off the top and the side edges. This is going to help you overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you gathered all the supplies, it's time to move into cutting. After printing and taping your pattern together, it should look like this. And after cutting, you should end up with 2 pocket flap panels cut out of your main fabric or your secondary fabric, 2 front bottom pocket panels cut out of your main fabric and your lining. And if you're using a lightweight main fabric, you can use that instead of a lining. 2 front top pocket panels cut out of your main fabric, 2 back pocket panels cut out of your main fabric, and lastly 2 main panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your secondary fabric. Moving on to construction, grab your front bottom pocket panels, place the lining to the side, and using the pattern, we're going to mark out where we're going to place the webbing. Mark both edges and the loop stitch guides. After marking, grab your webbing, and you can realistically use any webbing you want, any width and any style. Line the webbing up with the side markings and trim it about a 1/2 inch past the edge. Mark the loop stitch guides on the webbing, and that's where we're going to add our first stitches. Stitch directly on those guides across the whole strip of webbing. And be sure to do a nice tack stitch. After that, we're going to stitch directly on the edge as close as we can to the outside edge. Next, grab your zipper, and we're going to place the right side to the top edge of the panel with the webbing. Grab the lining and place it on the opposite side, sandwiching that zipper in between the 2 panels. Make sure the zipper is centered and it sticks out past the edges of the panel. Once you have it centered, we're going to stitch that top edge. And feel free to use a zipper foot or a regular presser foot. After stitching, flip the wrong sides together, lining up the 2 panels, and add a top stitch. And I'm going to be using an edge presser foot. This comes in handy for getting really nice, neat top stitches along edges and any seam. And of course, this is not required. It's just a tip to really take your sewing projects to that next level. I like to start with my zipper open, start the stitch, and then close the zipper. Doing this helps me keep that stitch nice and straight on both those panels. Next, grab both your front top pocket panels, place the right sides together, and stitch the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, we're going to flip the wrong sides together, flatten out that top edge, pin it together, and add a top stitch. Adding pins really helps keep that edge aligned. Using the pattern, we're going to mark the pleat guides on both top and bottom edges. We're going to take the outside markings and fold them in towards the center. Add a couple pins to secure it down, and for reference, check it with your bottom panel to make sure the edges line up. Grab your webbing, cut a 4-inch piece and your D-ring, feed it through your D-ring, and we're going to place that setup on the right side of our bottom pocket panel with a 1/2 inch hanging over the zipper and about 3 inches from the right edge. Grab the pleated top panel and we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the bottom edge and that zipper. Make sure the edges are lined up and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And make sure to stitch the pleat evenly. Next, we're going to add a quick tack stitch to the top pleat to hold it in position with the bottom. Make sure the D-ring is flat and add a top stitch to that bottom seam. And make sure you hold the pleat together as you stitch over it. This will prevent any gaps from opening in your pleat. Moving on, grab your pocket flap panels, place the right sides together, and we're going to stitch the bottom curved edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take your time going around the curves. You want them as uniform as possible. Cut out a few notches on both of the curves to reduce some of the bulk. After notching and reducing the bulk, flip the right sides out, line up the edges as best as possible, add a few pins, and we're going to add a top stitch to that bottom edge. This stitch is going to be very noticeable, so I recommend taking your time and making it very neat. Matching the thread color with your fabric color is another good way to hide any imperfections. And if you're having trouble making this stitch neat, feel free to change up the shape of that bottom edge. Grab the pattern and mark the button placement. We're going to be using magnetic snap buttons, so cut out your holes, grab the thinner side of your magnet, feed the top section through the hole, and add your backing. And these ones are a different style than the ones I usually use. The back just easily pops on, and when you have it securely in position, you can either use pliers or a die press. If you use a lot of grommets, I highly recommend grabbing a die press. It makes it so much easier to add details to your projects. Next, grab your main panel, and we're going to move the secondary fabric off to the side. Using the pattern, we're going to mark the loop and pocket placement. Grab your elastic and cut a 2-inch strip. Place the strip directly on your marking. Grab your pocket assembly, line it up with your marking, and flip it directly over the marking with the right sides together. Add a few pins and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Be sure to keep that edge as straight as possible. Flip the pocket assembly back over and add a top stitch to that bottom edge. And you're going to want to make sure the side edges are aligned as you're sewing. From here, we're going to line the top pocket edges up with the main panel and add a stitch on the side and bottom edges of that top pocket panel. For the sides, be sure to stitch as close as you can to the outside edge. This is just going to hold that pocket into position and also separate the top from the bottom pocket. Open up the pleat and add a stitch directly in the center of that pleat. This will split the top pocket into 2 pockets. If you don't want to split the pocket up, feel free to skip this step. Grab your completed pocket flap panel, place it in the center above your top pocket, and feel free to place the pocket based on preference. Just keep it at least 1 inch away from the main panel edges. Flip the flap over the horizontal axis, add a few pins, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you can, try to keep the stitch a little bit closer to the edge. Fold the flap back down and add a top stitch. And depending on your previous stitch, this should also cover up the raw edge on the inside. So the closer you stitch to the edge, the more of that raw edge you'll cover up when you add a top stitch. Fold the flap back down and mark the position of your snaps. And this is why we waited to mark the other half of our snaps, so that way we could get perfect aligned placement. After marking, cut out the holes, grab the bottom half of your magnet snap, place it through the hole, add the backing, and press it into position. After pressing the snaps, flap it back down to make sure everything is lined up. Lay the pattern back on the main panel and we're going to mark out the top section. Starting with our Velcro, we're going to take it apart, face the right side of your main panel down, and slide it under our top ends. Mark the cut length on your Velcro, and with the Velcro pinned to the fabric, trim around the outside edge. Go ahead and repeat this process for the other Velcro end. After you're finished, we're only going to sew the left one on, and it's going to go on the right side of your fabric. The opposite one's going to go on the underneath, but we're not going to sew it until we sew the bottom layer on. So back to the left side, stitch on the outside edge as close as you can to that edge. And it's helpful to use an edge presser foot along that curved edge. After stitching, cut a 4-inch strip of elastic, and we're going to add it at the top, directly on our placement guide, and stitch as close as you can to the outside edge. You can use elastic or webbing. This is just going to be another little clip loop. Grab your 2-inch metal ring and feed a 5-inch strip of webbing through the center. Place the setup on the placement guide and stitch as close as you can to the outside edge. Make sure the webbing is hanging past the edge of the main panel. Moving on, grab the back pocket panels, place the right sides together, and stitch the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the right sides out, flatten out the top edge, and add a top stitch. Same as we did for the top pocket panel. Flip the main panel right side down, add the secondary fabric with wrong sides together, and place the back pocket panel directly on the bottom edge. Tack it into position by sewing around the outside edge as close as you can to that edge. And you'll see why we keep sewing as close as we can to the outside edge in just a little bit. Make sure the pocket is perfectly aligned with the side and bottom edges, and from here we can add our opposite piece of Velcro on the secondary fabric. Align all of the layers, add a pin, and stitch around the outside edge as close as you can to the edge. And like before, matching the thread to your Velcro really makes for a nice professional touch. After adding the Velcro, we can trim all the way around the outside edge. Anything that's hanging past the edge or is not lined up, trim it flush with the overall edge. And after trimming, we're going to add bias tape all the way around that edge. This is the biggest part, and I'm going to show you a few different methods. The first method is using a bias tape making kit, and this is where you make your own bias tape. It's super simple to do. You cut your bias tape strips, feed it through your folder, and press it as it's coming out your folder. And by picking this method, you get to choose the size and also the color of fabric to match your project. The second method is using a double fold bias tape binder. You install this to your machine and it gives you the ability to sew directly onto your garment. It's a very fast and effective technique. The third technique is using pre-made bias tape. This technique, you're very limited to colors, but it's easy to do. You just fold it over your edge and stitch it down. This is a great way to go if you don't have a lot of tools to work with. The fourth technique is another binder, but this is just a single fold binder, and these ones are a lot easier to attach to both industrial and domestic sewing machines. And since it is only single fold, you do use a soft twill to feed through it. This is because the edges will be exposed, so you want to pick a fabric that doesn't fray. So once you decide on a method, go ahead and pin the layers together and add it all the way around the outside edge. I'm going to first start by showing you a quick demonstration of the single fold. It goes on super easy and overall less bulky than the double fold. But I will show the double fold too. This is another great method. I use this method all the time. It's a very quick way to clean up a raw edge. But again, use whatever method that works best for you. You can find these binders for both domestic and industrial machines. After completing our bias tape, we're going to finish our strap, so grab your buckle and your slider, cut a 1-yard strip and a 20-inch strip out of your webbing, feed the 20-inch strip through your buckle opening from top to bottom, fold the webbing edge over, hiding the raw edge, and add a pin. Grab the yard strip, feed it through your slider, and slide it down about a foot. Feed that same end through the buckle, from the outside opening to the inside opening, feed it back around through the slider, from the outside opening, back through the inside opening, and lastly, roll that edge over on top of itself, hiding that raw edge, add a pin, and we're going to stitch both of those webbing ends. Do a nice tack stitch to really lock them down, and that's going to complete your buckle assembly. You can always make this longer by using more webbing. Take your completed strap assembly, and we're going to attach it to our ring. Fold each of the webbing ends around the ring just like we did in the previous step, hiding the raw edge, and add a tack stitch. I end up changing the strap for a different color, so if you're not satisfied with the look of the strap, it's very easy to change. And there you have it, your holster bag is complete. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Hopefully your bag turned out great and you learned a lot of tricks and tips from this video. Like always, if you have anything you want me to make, definitely send it my way. But until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.